Thank you for joining us. This is yet another episode of Debunking Girl Math here at Norco College. This podcast has been funded by the RCCD Foundation, and it is in partnership with the Momentary program here at Norco College. Thank you for joining. My name is Tamara Cummings. I teach all things economics here at Norco College, and I'm joined by some fantastic co-hosts, all of whom have either taken a class, are going to take a class, or who are majoring in this discipline called economics, which is the absolute best discipline that there is here at Mercer College.
Yes, hello. I am Cole Cunningham. Thank you guys so much for listening. And again, thank you to the RCC Foundation and Norfolk College. I'm William.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Amber, and I teach economics here at Norfolk College, and I'm so excited to be here to debunk girl math.
Hi, guys. I'm back. My name is Anna. I'm an econ student.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Dowa Ross, former student at Norfolk College, and excited to be here debunking girl math because I have two young adults who swear by girl math concepts.
I think that is a great way for us to get started. Let's start with this idea of spending. So that was the next topic of conversation that we wanted to tackle here at Norco College, where we're thinking about spending not just as the demand side of the market or the consumption side of the market, but now we're thinking about spending as empowerment. So we've had other episodes where we've talked about spending, the good and perhaps the not so good about spending, and whether or not spending or consumption is consistent or equivalent to the income that we generate. And so we have some information here on the board put up by one of our co-hosts who is behind the scenes. Her name is Diane. We're really wanting to have a conversation and put up this idea that consumption is a function of perhaps income. Yes, no. I'd encourage you to think about Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who told us about consumption, which is with autonomous consumption, marginal propensity to consume, and disposable income. There's an actual function that deals with that. But we're going to talk about it as a casual conversation. Is spending empowerment? Or is it something other than empowerment? And how do we define empowerment? So I gave you several questions. Does anyone want to get us started?
Well, I would say that overspending is not equal to empowerment because then you end up in debt. But I mean, controlled spending helps you to build your self-image. You know how you appear. You spend on like you put supplements just to keep your health mood going and all that. But overspending is really and truly not empowerment.
So you introduced a concept, overspending and then control. Those are two really important words. And I would venture to say, well, whose control are we talking about? What is there to control if we can spend? And then the other thing is, this idea of discipline of overspending. Who says it's overspending? Isn't it okay for me to have money to buy what I want right now? Can you debunk that, or am I justified in what I'm saying?
I think that you could spend the money that you have, but I think it's kind of a dangerous skill almost. You don't want to spend too much because if you're spending all this money, well, what do you have left over for essential things that you actually need, like rent, food, water, and other things like that? Because essentially at the end of the day, this spending is empowerment. Could be seen as something that could rise your social status, and things like that. But if you're overspending, you're just lying to the public and now you're in debt.
You like that? You're lying to the public. You're not lying to yourself because you know exactly what's happening in your bank account, but you might be lying to other people, right? To impress them, maybe by your amount of spending or what you're spending on, right? So spending was empowerment, maybe status, right? So spending is a function of status, maybe. How many of us spend our money at a place that we honestly cannot afford just because there's a status associated with that? Has anyone ever gone into a store where you had no business trying to buy something from that store, only to rack out with bags with the name of that store just to impress? And how does that make you feel? Is that not empowerment?
That is absolutely empowerment. It's very intriguing I do. I find it so intriguing that it seems to be some sort of a trend these days whereby people are getting these things that they can't afford, but creating the illusion that they can, that they absolutely belong in that store. Um, maybe because they walked out with the bag. I certainly am guilty of that because um, I remember not long ago going to London with my girls and taking them to the big expensive department store Harrods and couldn't afford much. Pair of socks here, bracelet there, but they knew these little girls were from America, and so they treated them to the big bags, the really big bags. So we walked out with maybe a chapstick but we had the green and gold bag. And we're not only just spreading down the street in Knightsbridge, but we are going back to Los Angeles and through New York. And that just says that these two little girls were in London at Harrods buying stuff. We looked important. And for some reason or other, there was an empowerment in that illusion.
I love that idea because perhaps it ignited something in these young shoppers, let's call them, to say, one day I can aspire to shop for what I want at that place by generating the income I will need to shop at those places. So that's certainly one way of thinking about spending as empowerment. But I don't want to lose sight of what Shirley just said, Dr. A just said, which is, spending can also be disempowerment because it can put us into debt. And debt is not freedom. I love that thinking. Debt is not freedom. In fact, how many of us are carrying any level of debt right now? Guilty. I think everyone here in front of the camera and behind the camera is talking about, yes, I'm carrying some level of debt.
It's been normalized, but I think there are certain circumstances where it's warranted. For instance, I'm still paying on a car. Okay, I need that car to run my girls around to go to school. So to me, that debt is acceptable because I couldn't afford the $40,000 or whatever it was that my little mother-mobile cost.
I can translate for you because you have to learn how to. I think what she's trying to say is like, well, we need these goods, right? Well, right now in the time that we live in, we all have phones. We all have them. Like that's I feel like a reasonable debt. I'm still paying off my phone. I have it attached onto my phone bill every month. So I have the debt of paying my phone bill every month, and on top of that, the equipment.
So I love that. Diane was talking about, debt that we can shoulder versus debt that buried us, right? Maybe as a comparison. Is that fair to say? And I wonder how many of us have debt that we know we can shoulder in the next 30 days and then amass that debt again and pay it off in another 30 days. And do we live like that on purpose, or do we simply amass debt and then it begins to tower over us, right? So these are concepts that we don't talk perhaps enough about, but these are everyday struggles, I think, for everyone. And so I wonder, Shirley mentioned earlier, there's this debt that doesn't feel good, and debt is not freedom. At the same time, is there this idea that debt is perhaps necessary? And what is the amount of necessary debt so we can get over the next 30 days, start over again, make sure we have the income to pay it off? Should we live that way? Or is it sufficient just to have credit?
You have to live within your limits. So, for example, if you can afford a Google phone, then why do you go for an iPhone that is going to cost you a half a leg? If you can go for a cheaper network, personally, I use a cheaper network that is it's really cheap, but there's other networks that's very expensive. So you have to find a way to live within your means so you can shoulder your debt and avoid credits. And remember, it's also going to affect your credit score and going to make you very weak and not empowered, actually. So that will actually weaken you instead of empowering you.
So, what is the amount of debt that is appropriate to carry? I'm coming back to the question because I think there are so many different ways for each person to answer it. What is the right amount of debt to shoulder at any given time?
I think it's it really depends on your situation, but it also depends on what you're paying for with that debt. If you're buying items like luxury items that you don't really need, then you shouldn't have that debt because you can't afford it anyway. But things like a house and a car, those things are really expensive. Almost nobody has like, but almost houses cost a lot.
A lot of money. Let's put it
It's
that
like
way.
say 800,000 for just a normal house now. So nobody has that money to just carrying around $800,000 to pay that. You need the debt. There's no getting around it really. So it just depends on what you're buying.
Any other thoughts about it?
And it also depends on your income. So, for example, if you're earning 2,000 a month, then you can stay within your income. That is maybe spending up to 1,000 or 1,005 and not going beyond that. So, I don't know. I remember one time there was someone who told me that if you can afford to pay for something 7 times, like can afford to pay for this pen seven of this pen, then you can go for it. So then if you cannot afford to pay 7 of this, then it is not advisable to go for it because then you end up.
So, what do we make of the idea? We teach it in other classes in economics where I am spending in anticipation of earning an income that will afford me these items. Is that flawed thinking, or is that, I mean, we teach it in economics, right? There's this thing as a delay that happens or a lag that happens, but I'm doing this spending now in anticipation that I'll have the income. And oh, since I'm spending now, it benefits me now. And that will make me better off so that I can earn that income at a later time. I do believe that's part of the spending habits in which we indulge, whether it's for luxury items. We've heard of luxury items being the next best investment, right? How many of us have said, let me buy this type of bag because of status, and oh, it's a great safe investment because the value of it will appreciate or something of that nature. But some of us spend in anticipation of, oh, well, a good job.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to go into girl math too, because even I've been guilty of saying like future me will deal with that. Future me will figure out how to pay that bill, and that's it. I mean, I lay myself to sleep and like calm. But then future me is panicking, you know.
But does future me make it happen? Future me does make it happen. I don't know how she does it.
But yeah,
You
I know it's so bad.
Oh, the shame of having to return a Lamborghini or a Birkin.
well,
Oh, that took the word out of my mouth, if I could say that.
it does happen to me a lot. I realize that, and I am full of money. So I just go to the store and I return everything.
So, Dr. A, that moment, though, was empowerment.
Yeah.
Even though you were creating debt in that moment and you returned it, is that not a moment of empowerment?
I don't think so. I don't think the moment of receiving the items
Yes.
is good.
Absolutely.
But in anticipation and your future me doesn't happen, then you're like, oh, it doesn't really speak to me well. So please take it back. And then feel,
I've been there. Like I can't. Yeah, I shouldn't have bought this. Let me go return it.
I don't really need it.
Um, I love this discussion because it just reminds me of how these thoughts are so naive of the girl math. It reminds me of my daughter's tiny girl math, whereby I'd say to them, "Oh no, honey, we can't have that because we don't have the money. We can't afford it."
Well, we can always go to the ATM.
Not understanding where the money's coming from.
Exactly.
Mine was less about the ATM. And they always said, Mom, you have those plastic cards in your purse. that was equivalent to, what did you call it? The ATM, the automated teller machine, where so long as I have a plastic card, mom has money. So there's a disconnect between money and spending, or money someone else is making and spending, or money not necessarily always flowing into that plastic or flowing into the ATM machine, as you mentioned, that can result in spending. But I like the idea of thinking, and I think it's a concept that dominates our time, which is I spend because I want to feel good right now in this very moment, and I can't think about what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the day thereafter, that I need to feel fulfilled right now. And so we engage in this thing called emotional spending, which we justify for so many different reasons. I like this idea, though, Shirley, that you shared about shopping, being really satisfied, being really fulfilled, which I equate with empowerment, by the way, and then deciding I can be rational, I can be logical. Let me return these items. I don't need them and I can't afford them. And I think that that's one of the notions that we'll talk about so much in economics, where consumption or demand deals with ability, right, and willingness, not just willingness, not just ability, but it deals with a consumer in this great discipline of economics, which we love to teach. You have to have an ability and you have to have a willingness to engage in consumption. And I think somewhere along the way, we've justified we don't need to have both. We simply need to be satisfied in this moment, and then we'll resolve this issue down the road. Still some form of empowerment. Any concluding thoughts?
I would say empowerment. Does that mean that it's worth it? Worth that pain of the teetering in those red-soled shoes?
Oh, the red bottoms?
Yeah.
I love them. I don't own any.
Are they returnable? Better have that $1,000 in the account.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so much richness in the conversation that we had, some takeaways even. Well, we can think about consumption, we can think about spending, we can think about how buyers engage in their transactions with money, and sometimes we just found out without money, right? Where we indebt ourselves. And what does that result in? Perhaps temporary empowerment, but also long-term debt. And so the key is really balance. Where do we find this point of equilibrium? Where do we find the balance between the money that I earned and what I can afford to buy? And then peace of mind as well. Do our purchases result in peace of mind? Or like Anna said, do they increase our levels of stress because I have to glide, I have to hustle in order to cover these expenses? Any concluding thoughts that you want to share about spending as empowerment or spending as disempowerment or spending as debt or spending as gratification before we close out this podcast?
I think I would just like to say that with empowerment, empower yourself within means of what you can afford. Don't overspend to like put up an image that you are richer than you actually are or anything like that.
It's called Keeping Up with the Joneses. Yeah. I think that's excellent. Thank you for following and joining us in this particular podcast where we'll talk about spending as empowerment with all of our co-hosts, Cole, Dr. Shirley, Anna, and Dowa. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again for another series of Debunking Girl Math, which is a project funded by the RCC Foundation in partnership with the Umoja program here at Norco College. Well, thank you, and we'll see you soon.